All right, so here we go. Chapter 7 podcast, talking about basically the American Revolution from beginning to end. I'm going to try and fly through our study guide here at a pretty rapid pace, but feel free to stop, rewind, slow it down, whatever you have to do. But I just want to give you the nuts and bolts so you've got a little something to go to, a little something to listen about. Number one starts off with true or false. Most Americans supported the American Revolution when it began, and that answer is a resounding false. Only about a 40%, historians estimate that only about a 40% of the Americans were actually in support of the war or were considered patriots. Our second question is kind of an opinion question, and you can kind of answer this either way. Which side do you think Native Americans would take? Would they take the side of the British, who convinced them that if they took their side that basically said the Americans will take your land if they win? Or would they take the side of the Americans and say, hey, we'll give you a lot of land if we win? So it's kind of a toss-up for that question. Now remember, at the start of the war, Washington had three main goals. There were three goals that he had. That first goal was simply to survive. He just wanted to survive, outlast the British. His second goal was to win some battles. Remember, he didn't want to win every battle. He said, if we can win a couple of battles here and there, that'll be good enough early on in the war. And thirdly, he wanted to avoid that crushing defeat. He wanted to avoid a huge defeat at the British hands. Our fourth question, who are the Hessians? Why, they were the Germans, right? They were mercenaries, hired soldiers that the British government, that Parliament paid to come fight against the Americans. Question number 5, early on in the war, what major city did the British capture? Well, that would have been none other than New York City. Remember, we see General William Howe came into New York City right here and was able to capture New York City early on in 1776. Also, early on in 1776, things were bad for the Americans, really bad. Remember, way back before winter break, we watched The Liberty's Kids with our little friend Henri, the little Frenchman, right? Remember him? And Washington crossed the Delaware. We're on number 6 now. Washington crossed the Delaware on Christmas Day and got a strong victory. We're talking right here in Trenton. Right? Trenton. Washington got a big victory at Trenton, Christmas Day, surprise attack. This was huge because it rejuvenated the American spirits. Remember, Washington wrote home to a friend, and he said, if we don't do something quickly, I fear the game is pretty near up, meaning we have to do something quickly. Remember, the British, their early strategy was to cut off New England, right? Come right up the Hudson River here, right up through the St. Lawrence River, and control this New England region. Remember Boston. Boston was the heart of the American Revolution. They thought basically if we can cut off the head, the rest will die. And then number 8 then, true or false, all the fighting took place in what is now today the United States. False, right? Let's not forget about John Paul Jones, right? Naval commander for the Americans. He got that awesome defeat when he defeated the Serapis, the British warship, way over here in Great Britain. So there were battles that took place outside of what today we would consider the United States. And here, turning point in the war. Well, of course, we know that the turning point was Saratoga, right here in upstate New York. You might wonder, why is that the turning point? 2 reasons. 1, it prevents Great Britain from achieving their strategy of conquering New England, right? Because now the Americans are able to control the Hudson River Valley. And 2, and probably more importantly, this brings in help from abroad. This brings in this brings allies to the Americans. The French, oui, oui, and the Spanish, si, si, right? The Spanish and the French, and of course, we can't forget the Dutch. So we have the French helping us out, the Spanish helping us out, and the Dutch. Speaking of foreign help, we also have Baron von Steuben. Kind of a German guy, although not a Hessian. He was hired by Washington to basically organize the army. Remember, one of the keys to American success was leadership. Von Steuben is a part of that. Let's talk a little bit about Valley Forge, because that's where von Steuben and Lafayette, we see some of those foreigners helping out here. Remember, Valley Forge right here, southeastern Pennsylvania. Super cold, harsh winter, amputations, starvation, disease, bad winter. But Washington and his men survived. And we're on number 14 right now, by the way. Second side of your study guide, number 14. But we know that Great Britain had a powerful navy. Most powerful navy in the world. The Americans, not so much. So they turned to what we would call privateers, which were basically, they hired people to go and attack British ships. Think of privateers as a lot like pirates. These ships would go and attack British ships in their ports, They would steal their cargo, and then they would turn around and sell that cargo. They would sell the stuff that they stole from the British, and they would give a percentage of what they stole and sold back to the Americans. Number 17, the path to victory. Things are starting to look up. Who is Nancy Hart? 2 words for you. Yankee Doodle. All right, remember, she was the lady who allegedly hummed Yankee Doodle as she hung some Tories or some Loyalists. Pretty hardcore lady. Another hardcore lady, Deborah Sampson. Number 18 there, Deborah Sampson. She dressed as a man. Women weren't allowed to fight. She dressed as a man, enlisted in the army, and even fought in some battles. Way to go, Debbie S. Things aren't looking good for the British. They were not successful up here in New England. So what do? Well, they think we got to move the war south. 3 reasons why they moved the war south. Number 1, they were no closer to winning in the north than they were in the south. Things weren't going good up here in the north, in New England, even as far south as Philly. So they thought, hey, let's move south. Why are we going to move south? That's answer number 2. They thought that there would be more loyalists in the south. They thought, we'll get some easy victories, and then we'll put the loyalists in charge. They'll be able to hang on to our southern territories, and then we can refocus back on the north. And then thirdly, we don't have it on the map here, but imagine the islands down here, the West Indies, right? There were a lot of British seaports here, a lot of British troops stationed. These islands here are much closer to the south than they are to New England. So they thought, we can use this as kind of a supply base down here. We can use it to resupply ourselves. We saw in the south a lot of what Francis Marion, the swamp fox, what we now call guerrilla warfare. Not guerrilla like that, but remember guerrilla, G-U-E-R, not G-O-R. And remember, guerrilla warfare, that's simply hiding in the woods, jumping out, surprise attacks, or hit-and-run raids that the British soldiers weren't really used to it. Coming towards the end of the war, last major battle of the war, well, that would be the Battle of Yorktown, right out here on the peninsula. Last major battle of the war, August of 1771, number 22, General Cornwallis defeated at the Battle of Yorktown. When did the war end? Well, 1783. What signified the end of the war? The Treaty of Paris. Not to be confused with the Treaty of Paris in 1763 that ended the French and Indian War. This is the Treaty of Paris of 1783, which ended the American Revolution. Again, real quick, we're running short on time. 4 reasons why the Americans were victorious. We know they were outnumbered. We know that they were outmanned, outgunned, outsupplied, outmoneyed, whatever. British had the advantage, but the Americans won for 4 reasons. Number 1, better leaders. George Washington was like LeBron James, man. He took it to another level. The guy, he was a great leader. Number 2, allies. The French, and then, of course, the Spanish, right? So we had foreign allies. Better leaders, foreign allies. Thirdly, the hide-and-go-seek effect, or better knowledge of the land. The Americans had much better knowledge of the land than the British did. Just like playing hide-and-go-seek with your cousins from out of town. You know the hiding spots. And lastly, motivation. The Americans wanted it more. If they lose their friends, they lose their family, they lose their freedom, they lose their liberty, they lose everything they're fighting for. If the British lose, well, shoot, they just get back on not a plane, not a bus, but on a boat, and they go back home. So, leaders, allies, knowledge of the land, and motivation. We talked about the Treaty of Paris, which ended the war. We'll talk about this briefly in class as well. But basically, there were a couple of parts that the British did not honor. They did not return any slaves that they used in their army, so that will hurt the southern economy, we will see. And they also didn't give up. They had some military forts up in the Great Lakes region. They hung around for that. Lastly, the Treaty of Paris, it established, first of all, it made America free. Hallelujah, we now have the United States of America. But it also set its boundaries. We go from the Atlantic coast to the Mississippi River to Spanish Florida and up to Canada. So it's basically this whole chunk of land now becomes the United States. The United States after the war, deep in debt, not a stable government, people aren't sure what to do. It's basically total chaos. The country has been destroyed. They have to rebuild. They owe money to people. They don't have a formal government. There's a lot of questions surrounding this young country that they're going to have to answer and that we're going to take a look at next time. So there you have it. That is our study guide in a nutshell. Again, I know we blazed through it. I hope that I've answered some questions that you might have. Good luck. Please take your studying seriously. Prepare a note card. Prepare yourself for that essay. I know you'll do great.